The latest Dune Awakening Direct is here. This is their... I don't know how often they do these now. The pace is picking up. This is the official development video for the project, for Dune Awakening, that where they kind of elaborate on new stuff, features. I think this one is going to be all about Gamescom, but I believe they're also going to show us some new gameplay in this as well. We're going to be watching it back now. There'll be some pausing as we go through it and break it down. Hoping to see some new juicy nuggets, but ultimately I'm just looking forward to going back to Arrakis, baby. Back to Arrakis. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. I'm so glad they got the music, the Hans Zimmer style music for this game. I'm so glad. Music is so important in video games and MMOs. To be clear, it isn't Zimmer. I think it's another composer. It's not Zimmer himself, but they've nailed that Zimmer-esque sound. Are we going to see more about combat? We're going to hear more about the game, the combat, the melee, I wonder. I think it's going to be a lot of Gamescom stuff.
Hello and herzlich willkommen to Gamescom. I'm Zoe Schwind, and you can see today you're not joining me on Arrakis, but the next best thing, which is of course our Dune Awakening booth here at Gamescom in beautiful Cologne, Germany. Now it's been a very exciting week already with the gameplay reveal at opening night live, and of course all the streams showing the awesome presentations we had here on our show floor. Now with all that new content come a lot of new questions, so I am lucky that I will have a few minutes with Joel Byles later today to hopefully answer some of those questions. But first things first, let me show you around.
Okay, so we're getting a little Q&A.
Joel, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me for a quick chat.
Thank you for having me.
So before we're digging deeper into all the new things we've learned and seen about Dune Awakening, how does it feel for the first time to be able to show your game to the public?
I mean, it's really, really exciting. It's humbling to see what the public think. Like when you really get it in front of players, people who play the game. Like we've shown it to journalists and creators a few times, but this is really like the first look for people who, you know, just play games. You know, will they get into the gameplay? Will they like it? You know, are they seeing what we see, the promise of the game?
So you say the reaction of the players, have you just been creeping around the corners of the booth to watch them whilst they play?
You're watching people play, like, you know, I'm the guy who stands behind you and kind of...
There will be a comment or two about that, I'm sure.
Coughs every time you...
It's going to play differently.
Yeah, exactly. It's left. Left.
You guys came not just, of course, with a game to showcase, but also a new tagline. It's Survive, Expand, Control. What's the tagline all about?
Survive, Expand, Control is really kind of the phases that the player goes through on their journey in Dune Awakening. And we've kind of always had this, like we will always use this internally to explain the player journey. In the beginning of the game, the player is really learning the mechanics of survival, the harshness of Arrakis, dealing with, you know, the heat, learning to find water, you know, avoiding that sandworm, and sort of making their way through the world. But then over time, they become more settled. They start to build a base, they start to expand outwards from their base, they build vehicles, they go out into the world and explore, they expand their operations, they expand their bases, they make them larger, maybe they move to a better part of the map that they prefer. And then eventually, once you've sort of seen what the world has to offer, you start vying for control over the spice. So you want to start, you know, forming a guild, perhaps signing up with one of the factions, and of course, trying to control the production of spice on Arrakis.
So it's like a bit of a checklist for the player, essentially.
Exactly.
Like these three steps and then profit.
These 3 steps, 300 hours later, and you're the king of the world.
Easy. It's so simple. Starting at the beginning there with Survive. We've talked about survival on Arrakis plenty of times before. We, you know, covered worms, war, all the good stuff. We haven't really talked about the sun that much. Can you maybe elaborate on how people can withstand it?
Praise the sun. You have to sign on with a faction. No, the factions are, you choose them in the game, and you can basically build your reputation with them as you go. Choose which factions you want to work for, which factions you want to build your rep with, and then go through there.
Like, what can you do against the
You are
sun on
Mecca,
Arrakis?
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the most obvious thing is travel by night. And the second most obvious thing is stick to the shadows, right? So obviously the game has a full dynamic day-night cycle, and as the sun moves through the sky, the shadows change position in the world, and you want to try and stick to where they are and do your activities in the shade. Now that isn't always possible, so you start to craft yourself gear like still suits, which allow you to, resist more heat, and of course preserve water. And you start to craft yourself like Stiltents, which allow you to.
Hey, there we go. That's something new. They did say they'd be showing off some new stuff. So there's little tents you can make, just like in the film. So what, is this like your, oh shit, I'm gonna burn to a crisp? I need to put up a tent. I need to stay here for a extended period of time. Can you have the literal Muad'Dib as a pet, I wonder? I think they're in the game. They are in the game. Don't know if you can have them as a pet, but...
Like, have portable shelter in the world.
All right, so those still suits and the still tents, is that something I can craft myself?
Yes, so especially later on in the game, part of the journey that you go on as a player is you go through these trials of Akul, which are kind of a Fremen ritual. And at the end of those rituals, you learn recipes that the Fremen have prepared for their own survival in the desert. And you as a player can then start to craft those items that you picked up, yeah.
Can I, for example, also...
Wait, that's a big lot of new information as well.
And you start to craft yourself...
myself?
Yes.
And the still tents, is that something I can craft myself?
Yes, so especially later on in the game, part of the journey that you go on as a player is you go through these trials of Akul, which are kind of a Fremen ritual. And at the end of those rituals, you learn recipes that the Fremen have prepared for their own survival in the desert. And you as a player can then start to craft those items that you picked up. Yeah.
Can I, for example, also build buildings and use their shade to hide behind? Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, sick. That's actually really cool.
It's actually kind of fun. It's also like sometimes you'll be out harvesting, right?
Yeah.
And there'll be a rock that's casting a shadow, and you'll be like, oh, I'm just going to crouch behind the rock before I shatter it so that I don't actually, get sunstroke.
Smart.
Cool.
So use the environment to your advantage, or create environment for your advantage.
And everything's kind of dynamic, so it's nice, yeah.
That's really, I mean, that's generally just so much joy, because everything on Arrakis is so dynamic, like the sand, the movements, the imprints you leave whilst walking on that sand as well.
That stuff is interesting, and then there's like other layers to that where you can use like certain devices to blow away the sand because you're looking for buried treasure. Things that get deposited by sandstorms, they leave treasure in their wake that you can actually, find hidden beneath the sand. You need a scanner to find it, and then you can, dig up the treasure. It's kind of cool.
That's cool. Interesting. I wonder if the footprints in the sand persist for a long period of time. I wonder if that's something you have to consider if you want to like hide. If you're trying to be stealthy, you're trying to avoid other players in the deep desert, for example. I wonder if you actually have to think about your footprints, if they're that persistent. I'd be surprised, but be a cool feature for a game like this set in the desert. Also, this is another cool feature that we haven't seen yet, the ability to go into the desert and just find stuff. Basically treasure hunting, like with a thingamajig. What are they called? Beep, beep, beep. Metal detector. Not the same thing, but it's the same principle, going out and just trying your luck. I like these things because they're trying to entice you to go on the sand. Because I'm worried that, a lot of the time in the game, yes, there's a bloody sandworm out there, but how often do I actually need to be out on the sand and have to worry about the sandworm other than the deep desert? But this is another cool thing where they're going to try and entice you to go onto the sand, be out there, risk reward gameplay essentially. And also the other thing we saw in the previous gameplay demo with the sand flower, I think it was called. The sand flower that you can go out and collect on the sand, which also triggers the sandworm. That stuff that's used as part of recipes and ingredients to build stuff. So that's two things we know of already where you are going to have to go out on the sand.
Just things like that the technology allows us to do.
That's really cool. Such an interactive open world to explore for all the players. Now, another thing we got to see more of during Gamescom is building and the process. We talked about blueprints a little bit, about the collaboration of building. I want to dig a little deeper into customization. How customizable are those buildings?
Well, I mean, so we have multiple different building sets, right? So the one that we've shown most of the time in these trailers is the CHOAM building set. CHOAM being kind of this organization that mass produces things in the world. And so you start with the basic building tiers. And then Over time, you can upgrade into more fancy versions, which have different visuals. And you have things like, if you join the factions, you get access to the Atreides, building set, the Harkonnen building sets.
Cool.
And these kind of allow you to visually customize how your base looks, right? And
Oh, that's good. I like that. So you can't go around, you can't be part of the Atreides and build Harkonnen looking structures. So you can basically have, you'd have these Hagar basins that are basically inhabited by certain factions. You won't be like walking around the Hagar basin, which are like the big, basically PvE zones. You won't be like walking from area to area and coming across a huge variety of different factions. I guess you could. I guess you still could. I guess you could still have multiple faction players in the PvE zones, but they would, they'd probably just have to separate their bases. I don't know who I'm going to join yet, GT. I don't know which faction I'm going to go for. Is this a one life game? What's the big deal if I get eaten? No, it's not a one life game, Mecha. It's just like it's like an MMO. You die, you respawn. If you get eaten by a sandworm, you lose all your gear. If you die to a player in the deep desert, you lose, like, I think it's randomly selected what items you lose. If you die in the PvE zone, I think you lose your resources only. There's different factors of death penalties depending on where you are and how you die. But it's you respawn, you come back. It's a survival game, basically. It's like a survival game, but with MMO qualities, like the ability to play with hundreds of players in certain areas.
Obviously, Harkonnen is very H.R. Geiger, very dark, and the Atreides is more like fancy castle kind of stuff.
Can I mix and match?
Yes, you can combine those in any way you like to create some really weird...
Oh, you can! So you can build Atreides and Harkonnen structures where it's mixed. So how would you do that then? I guess you'd have to trade other people for the blueprints or for the different faction stuff?
Weird hybrid combinations.
That can get very messy, can it? Okay.
It can look very weird.
But hey, that's what customization is all about. You want people to be able to express themselves.
Exactly. Expression and customization is one of our pillars. So express yourself however you like, even if it turns out that your Harkonnen Atreides hybrid is an abomination to mankind.
Another thing which has been coming up a lot more...
I ain't mixing and matching. Either Atreides or Harkonnen, or get out. Yeah, you do Harkonnen and a friend does Atreides, probably. Or you just buy access to the blueprints. You just buy the blueprints. Are we all going to team up in this, have a big group? Yeah, I guess so. It's, what's the word? It's limited to how many people you can have in one guild so far from what they've said. They want to limit it to like 50 players, but we're not going to go over those numbers, I imagine.
During what we've seen here at Gamescom is the presence of spice. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. We've seen two different types now, flower sand as well as spice. How do you harvest that? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so a part of the kind of mechanic of the game is drawing people out onto the sand where that sandworm is, making their lives a little more risky, a little more dangerous. Flower sand is this soft sand. It's mentioned in the books as a place where the Fremen like to pitch their tents because it's the softest place to sleep. It's kind of this very fine-grained sand you find on the most exotic beaches.
Dolo, yeah.
Or Arrakis.
Yeah, or Arrakis in this case. It's very fine-grained sand. And in the game, you need it as a resource for crafting. So you can go out there, you can harvest this flower sand by hand. It takes a little while to harvest a lot of flower sand that way. Or you can use this really cool tool we have called the static compactor. And when you fire the static compactor at the ground, it kind of takes all the sand and lumps it together in this big pile for you to just harvest straight away.
That sounds like something that makes noise though.
Yeah, it does, right? And when you make a lot of noise on the sand, you start to attract the sandworms.
This is the footage we saw from the gameplay demo. This is really cool.
So these are kind of the mechanics you use for harvesting flower sand. And then later on, when you get to spice, it works functionally, it's quite similar in that the big spice blows leave giant spice fields on the sand, and you kind of harvest in the same way. You can harvest by hand, you can harvest with a static compactor, and of course you want to bring to harvest the most, you want to bring a sand crawler, dump that on the surface and use it to suck up as much spice as possible. And naturally, all of these things take place on the open sand, and the sandworm always comes.
Is there an effect from being around the spice for too long whilst harvesting? Like, am I inhaling the spice? What is happening to me?
Yeah, so just by virtue of being on Arrakis, you're inhaling a lot more spice than you probably would if you didn't live on Arrakis.
Factual,
And we see that in the films as well. Happens in the books. And so as a player, if you stand around on a spice blow too long without proper protection, you start to inhale too much spice and it gets into your bloodstream, and that can lead to, let's say, certain effects on your character in the world and in the game. Yeah, the idea of these visions that Paul has, I think, is an interesting thing. We're definitely exploring this kind of idea in the game. What it is and what it means, I'll leave for the players and their imagination, and hopefully one day they'll find out.
Noted. Now that I harvested all that spice, though, what's the main usage for it other than the personal use? Like, why am I out there harvesting and,
Good questions.
Risking my life for it, really?
Sure. I mean, in the books, the Fremen use spice for everything. It's something that became a huge part of their culture. And in the same way, the player also starts to sort of find multiple uses for spice all the time. You need spice residue for fueling some of the generators in the base. You start using spice to craft almost anything in the world. Like, some of the higher tier gear in the game really requires spice as a key ingredient. Use it to pay your taxes to the Emperor, because otherwise
I have to pay taxes in this game too.
This is how we claim a sub thief.
Can't escape it, man.
You can't escape those taxes. I mean, you can. You don't have to pay them, and then you get killed by the Sardaukar and try to fight. But that's an option.
Cool. Yeah. So if you don't pay your taxes, the Sardaukar, this command has got to go. We can't have this command on the React screen. It's terrible. If you don't pay your taxes, I guess what happens is the AI starts to send Sardaukar against you. Did we get it? A very mature channel here. Very mature channel. Very mature content.
You have.
Okay.
And then, of course, if you want to go into the Landsrad, spice is kind of the primary currency of the kind of political infighting that's happening between the major houses, and you can take a large role in that. And of course, you can sell it to make a lot of money.
So spice, it's everywhere.
Spice is the backbone of everything.
It really is.
And it should be. It's a Dune game, man. It's a Dune game. So yeah, I like that idea. I think we talked about this before, where the Sardaukar come in, destroy your base, destroy your stuff if you don't pay the taxes. From what they've said in the past, I think they said it's not that difficult to keep up spice production and pay the taxes, but it's a money sink, and money sinks are important. Money sinks are important to keep you playing and give you reasons to do stuff.
Another thing that we saw in regards to spice, or even touched on in previous episodes, was abilities as well. Is there anything you can share about the connection between spice and abilities?
Yeah, so as the player's blood gets saturated with spice,
you like it or not, mums,
you can imagine how abilities might be altered by being able to see just a little bit into the future. And so, we have some of those effects in the game. I won't, again, spoil too much of it, but yeah, it will have an impact on your abilities.
Fine.
Cool.
I'll take that. That was an answer.
So increased, we're talking increased attack
I can't
speed.
go too far down that path.
Evasion. If you take a bit of
speaking
spice.
of abilities, though, it was really, really exciting to see some new abilities showcased here at Gamescom. Shield was one of them. Can you maybe talk a little bit about adding new abilities, your philosophy when it comes to creating abilities and make them work in your world?
Sure. We have. First of all, we have our different archetypes, right? And we try to maintain our consistency with the lore of who those people should be. So if you are a Mentat or a Trooper, it's kind of like your basic set of abilities is kind of aligned around what that archetype would be using. So, Mentat, human computers, being able to see and calculate information really quickly in the world. But then, from a gameplay and fun perspective, we're trying to build a game that has combat that is about getting in close for melee combat and then pulling back quickly to go back to range. So you're always switching your tactics based on the enemies you're fighting. If they're wearing shields, then you need to get in there and attack them with melee. Ranged attacks just won't do the trick, right? So it's kind of really about this push and pull. And so our ability design is really about giving players options, whether that is about getting you to them as quickly as possible, that is things like the dash ability, getting you in really fast, or using a Shigawire Claw on the environment to pull yourself close to the enemy, but also giving you abilities like the Voice Compel, which allows you to pull the enemy and compel them with the voice to walk to you so that they can be struck down by your blade. So it's kind of about combining these things, and our ability design really takes this to heart. How do we get people in and out as quickly as possible?
So with the traversal abilities, I can really kind of pair that with items and tech, right?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, we have the suspensor belts, which basically at their lowest level allow you to fall without taking damage, but at their highest level allow you to fly basically freely with you know, obviously power drains over time, but suspensor belts really allow you full mobility in the air.
I love the mobility, dude. Love these things. Combining those with the trigger wire hook, mobility is nuts. But I guess, you know, you're going to be sacrificing other things if you have these items on you. So these are item skills essentially. So, you know, if you're wearing the suspensor belt, that's another item potentially you're not wearing that would allow you to do something else. You've got the mobility, but maybe you're sacrificing some defensive capabilities or some sort of attack capabilities.
I'm essentially the Baron at that point.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. And that's the fantasy. And then you can
Your
combine
fantasy
those.
is to be the Baron, so I need to stop you
I've been
right
working
there.
on it for years.
Okay.
Good stuff.
But no, so the ability to like use suspensor belts to fly around, right, and then combining it with a sugar wire claw, using the momentum of both of them to pull you through the world, you know, twice as fast as you could normally move.
I hope the balance
or, you know, using the dash into a suspensor belt, which
I
allows
hope the
you
balance is done in a way so that everybody's not using suspensor belts and everybody's not using the hooks, right? If you're using those things, you essentially should. You know, you should be sacrificing something else. So there should be maybe, you know, you have different builds essentially for different things you're doing, which I think is probably how it will work, right? If you go into the deep desert, you know you're going to be getting into PvP. Maybe you won't use as much of the suspensor belts and the hooks because you know you've got to be out like on the sand defending spice blows, etc. Right? But if you're doing more PvE or you're doing more PvP like in and around the rocks and things where you've got multiple levels that you want to traverse, then suspensor belt and the hook would be more enticing for those situations.
To like really go quickly in the world is kind of crazy, and we might need to tone it down. But that sort of stuff is like, it's super interesting to see, and that's kind of what we mean by our combined arms. It's like playing around in the sandbox with the way that the combat, the abilities, all these kind of things come together to just make combat feel really dynamic and interesting.
There were a lot of interesting things, obviously,
really need to see more melee
during
though.
Gamescom that were shown during
It's my main
you
concern.
know, the opening ceremony, and also the things we see here on the booth. Also, we got to get more sneak peeks into like the player hubs. So we got to see a sneak peek of an allegiance ceremony, for example. But that's something that you shared in the past, that people do not have to align with one of the houses. That's still true, right? I do not have to get involved in any of that.
It is true. You as a player do not have to join one of these factions in the game. You're not forced to join them. You can play the game as a lone wolf or like with your little clan or guild of people who don't want to be part of the major faction, but you'll always kind of end up interacting with them in some way.
That's cool.
Right? The Harkonnen and the Atreides are fighting this war of assassins over the planet's surface, and in some way your contracts and the way that you work in the world, you're always going to encounter them in some
You can
form,
be
but
like
you
a
don't have
gurney
to
Halleck,
join them. You don't have to be one
smuggler.
of them. You can maintain your independence. You can help people who are participating in the Landsrad, but you don't have to be aligned necessarily with either of those groups.
That's
now,
really cool.
I mean, I do think it's a bit of a shame to miss out, because sometimes if you don't join, for example, the Atreides, you won't be able to get their best gear. You won't be able to get, you know, all of the building set, for example, that the Atreides has, and you'll definitely miss out on their cool "awoo" battle cry.
He worked it in.
But
Shout out to Discord.
shout out to Discord. But but you know, it's completely up to you as a player, and you will be able to buy things like Atreides outfits that other players craft and put on the
Or the blueprints.
Yeah,
I can
things
still
right.
get my.
People can put things out for you to buy. Yeah.
Okay, so the major drawback of not aligning with one of the houses would just be that I'm missing out on like specialized items
House
in a
rewards.
way. House rewards.
And I mean, I think some of the cooler political story stuff that we're putting into the game as well is like, it's interesting, but you don't have to do it. The main story is not tying you to one faction or another.
How locked in am I? Like, can I still play both sides in a way? Is there a drawback once I'm tying myself to Atreides? Then one day I wake up and I'm like, new day, new me. I don't want to be this anymore.
I'd like to go join the Baron.
Exactly.
Yeah, no.
What happens then? Can I leave?
I mean, yeah, of course, it's Dune, right? Of course you can backstab people, and it's certainly
okay,
an
that's
option.
lovely.
So you can go down that way if you really want to get those rewards. Of course you can betray your solemn oath to the Red Duke. You can do that. I don't think he'll look kindly on you after that point, but you definitely have the option.
I had my reasons. I'm sure.
Okay, so my question is, what are the advantages of not aligning with one of the factions? Why would I want to be a neutral on Arrakis? I think that should mean maybe it means you get access to the different both of the faction hubs. Maybe you can be like an intermediary between trade between Harkonnen gear and items and Atreides gear and items, right? So you maybe you get access to like you can get access to the lower levels of both, but not like the higher end stuff. So you can work for all of them, but you don't get as much rewards. Exactly. Like maybe you can be like a in between both, and I don't know. Gain the things that you want from both factions, but not really reaching any of the end tier that the factions have to offer.
Sure, or will have my reasons rather. Okay, so there's benefits and advantages and a few drawbacks there, whether or not I want to align or get involved politically. Got it. Now, last but certainly not least, I think one of, if not the biggest announcement was, of course, the release window. Early 2025 is when players can get a hand on the game all over the world. But before that, will players get an opportunity to play more in a beta? Will there be a bigger beta, a more open beta? What's the spiel?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're still doing our persistent beta that we started a few months ago. We're letting in more and more people over time, and we're going to start boosting it in a big way, adding lots of people to the beta in the coming months so that we can really test our server robustness, our scaling, and of course things like our endgame systems, which we really need a lot of people to help us test out. So yeah, it's a great time. Hopefully people have already wishlisted the game and signed up on DuneAwakening.com, but if they haven't, still plenty of opportunities to get your hands on the game and make a decision about whether you like it or not before we launch it.
Absolutely. Well, Joel, thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, that sounds
release it back into the
confident.
wild to look at what the players are playing outside right now.
Yeah, I'm going to go and be nervous and try not to tell people how to play my game.
You're doing great. And that's it from our very special episode of Dune Awakening here at...
Man, that was nice. That was a good little direct. Yeah, nice little wrap up of Gamescom, ultimately. Some really cool sort of elaborations on some of the gameplay, some questions. We saw a little bit of some new nuggets in there, like the still tent and the treasure hunting that you can do on the sand. Exciting stuff. I think over the next couple of months, like you said, doesn't sound like open beta, but definitely sounds like way more invites are going to go out for the closed beta. This is exactly what I thought was going to happen because they obviously don't have enough people to test the bigger elements of the game. The server needs to be stressed. I think that's basically what's going to be happening over the next few months. It's just going to be ramping up the beta, stress testing, open beta testing, lots of marketing. I just hope that they have enough time to flesh out melee and combat in the game. It's the only thing that looks a little bit iffy so far. Good stuff otherwise. Thank you, everybody, for watching.